Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is a senior director at AccuWeather, Dan DePodwin. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be here with you, Brittany.
I want to talk about some big news coming out of Florida. Debby made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane on Monday morning. Since then, it has downgraded to a tropical storm. But what do we need to know?
So Debby made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane, and the main impact from Debby will be significant flooding rainfall, perhaps a historic flooding event for parts of South Carolina and North Carolina. Obviously, the wind was an issue near where Debby made landfall, along with a significant storm surge. But the main story going forward throughout the entire course of this week is going to be what could be an historic flooding event with over 15 inches of rain in some parts of Charleston, Savannah, some of the low country there of South Carolina is going to be in for a lot of rain over a long period of time, which is going to be expected to cause life-threatening flooding.
You're mentioning cities that are in South Carolina and Georgia. Has Florida seen the worst of Debby so far?
Florida has seen a lot of rain from Debby. It looks like the rain is starting to wind down, but still, as we head through Monday, even into Tuesday, there can be lingering rain causing flooding problems. Tampa and the surrounding areas picked up a record amount of rainfall on Sunday as the bands from Debby moved on shore, over 12 inches in some spots, which has certainly contributed to flooding. And that's what we've seen farther north into the Panhandle and the Big Bend of Florida there, where they've picked up over a foot of rain. The good news is, though, for Florida is that the impacts are starting to wind down, and now we're going to shift our focus into the Carolinas.
It downgraded to a tropical storm since it made landfall. Do you think it will continue to weaken as it moves on up north?
Certainly when it comes to wind, the worst of Debby looks like it's over. But that's important to not let our guard down because of the fact that, in fact, unfortunately, one of the or the most fatal aspect of tropical systems is flooding, and we expect a lot of it. So even though Debby is a tropical storm, one of the ways at AccuWeather we differentiate the tropical storms from really impactful tropical storms is the AccuWeather Real Impact Scale for hurricanes. And we've rated Debby a 3 on that scale, which goes from less than 1 and then 1 to 5. So a 3 is a pretty impactful storm. We expect widespread substantial flooding when we rate a storm a 3 on that scale. And so even though the wind intensity has subsided from Debby, we're very concerned that the flooding is going to be the main impact here for at least the next 3 to 5 days.
As you said, Debby's moving on up to Georgia as well as South Carolina. So when exactly can those residents be expecting to see that impact?
So we expect the impact to be a long-lasting impact, really from late Monday night into Tuesday, Wednesday, and in some places continuing Thursday as well, as Debby just slowly moves up the coast. It may go back offshore for a time and then make a second landfall. We would not expect that landfall to have a significant amount of wind with it, but there could be some strong winds very close to that point of landfall. Again, though, the fact that it's going to take 3 or 4 days from it to go from the Florida Panhandle to North Carolina is very concerning, and that's the reason that the flooding rainfall is going to be the most or the largest impact from Debby.
Can you talk a little bit why the slow-moving storm is concerning you more?
Yeah, absolutely, Brittany. Start that again. Absolutely, Brittany. We are concerned that the slow movement of storms, there's a long history, unfortunately, of tropical systems that are slow moving, causing significant, in some cases, catastrophic flooding. Residents of the Carolinas are unfortunately familiar with Florence in 2018, which set the record for amount of rainfall from a tropical system, both in South Carolina and North Carolina. Debby may get close to those totals, which were on the order of 2 feet of rain or even more in some places. So anytime you have slow movement with a lot of moisture, which is what you have in a tropical system, there's significant concern for flooding, and we may have to also watch farther north into the mid-Atlantic and maybe the Northeast come this weekend for heavy rain from what is Debby as it moves in that direction later on this week.
What's your advice for people who are perhaps in Georgia, perhaps in South Carolina on vacation, don't live there year-round, but they're facing the impact of Tropical Storm Debby in the upcoming days?
Absolutely. So the impact to Debby in the next couple of days will obviously be a significant one to those who are either vacationing or living in the Carolinas. If you, really no matter who you are, please pay attention to local officials, heed all evacuation orders. If you are living in a location or if you're visiting there, know your different evacuation routes, how much where you are in terms of flooding and what type of flooding would be an impact to you. There's obviously a difference between storm surge flooding if you're near the coast, where there can be a couple of feet of storm surge where that ocean rises up because of the significant push of water inland that's associated with tropical storms. But then there's the combination of that with what is called freshwater flooding, where it's raining very heavily for a long period of time. And in places like Charleston and Savannah, it doesn't take a lot of rain there to cause flooding without a tropical system. They've seen significant flooding in recent years due to those situations. And because they're close to the water, sometimes it's hard for the water to discharge out into the ocean because of the fact that the water in the ocean is already higher due to that storm surge. That's another reason, sort of that combination between ocean flooding and freshwater flooding. That's another reason why we're concerned, or so concerned, about the flooding risk in the Carolinas.
I know you mentioned that the Northeast will see some remnants of Debby. What does that look like? Is that anything like the historic nature that Georgia and South Carolina are going to see?
So at this time here on Monday, we don't expect it to be a historic storm for the Northeast, but there will be impacts expected probably Saturday or maybe Friday into Saturday across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Debby, as we mentioned, will be a slow mover, but by Friday it should start to gain some forward speed and move off to the Northeast. It may go back offshore, but it looks like it will interact with a different storm coming through the Great Lakes, and that can spread a pretty impressive swath of rain across parts of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. That includes places like Pennsylvania, Maryland, the Delmarva, New York City, up into southern New England. And we could be talking about a few, maybe 2, 3, 4 inches of rain, which could be enough to cause pockets of flooding as well. And coastal areas might deal with some 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts, sort of like a nor'easter in many cases. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on that this week here. And we'll be doing that at AccuWeather throughout the week, keeping a close eye, not just on the historic flooding and the expected in the Carolinas, but the eventual impact to the Northeast.
Dan, I want to look at the future just a little bit. Is there anything else on your radar when it comes to this hurricane season?
So it's, as AccuWeather has been predicting really since March, we expect this to be a supercharged hurricane season with 20 or more named storms. And we've already obviously seen 4. We are still very early on in the hurricane season. We are just entering August. The peak of the season is during the middle of September. So we have a long way to go here, and we do see plenty of more tropical systems on the horizon. There's a tropical wave that's moving into the Caribbean this week, and it could develop as it approaches the Western Caribbean and maybe moves into the Gulf of Mexico come either late this week or this coming weekend. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. It looks like there's another tropical wave behind it. So we have certainly reached the point of the season now after a bit of a 3 or 4 week lull in most of July, where we have plenty to talk about here over the coming weeks.
Dan DePodwin, thank you so much from AccuWeather. We always appreciate the conversations we have with your team. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.